and welcome to the Mediocre Photography Show. My name's Ben.
And my name's Jack.
And today we're going to bring you a new series called Two Boys, One Camera.
In this series, me and Ben use the same camera, same lens, and photograph the same location.
The idea of this project is to compare how different photographers can react to the same location in completely different ways, despite everything else being the same. Just like how the entire photographic industry is exactly the same.
In this episode, we went on a walk through Wistman's woods. The location was good, but for me personally, there wasn't enough space. As someone who likes to photograph subjects at a distance, I couldn't really find the angle for my photographs.
So I've actually been up to Wistman's quite a few times in the past, and it actually featured in one of my projects at university. So I know the location quite well, and I've always been quite a big fan of the textures and forms that the woods have had to offer. So I think that kind of put me at a little bit of an advantage. Overall, my photos were a lot more sort of flat and two-dimensional than Jack's were. I think mine were a little bit more like painterly, whereas Jack's tend to have a little bit more of a three-dimensionality to it. I also tended to focus on the smaller details, whereas Jack's photos were a little bit more stepped back from the subject.
These are the first two images we're comparing. As I said earlier, at Wistman's woods, I really struggled envisioning the photos as it was such a sort of claustrophobic space within the woods, so I only took one photo in the woods themselves. I was going to take a picture of the curly moss rock, but I thought that would be, I don't know, like robbing it off someone else. So like a mum using an iPhone with two hands, I took a picture of the next flower I saw. The Wistman's trees in the background act as a sort of backdrop to the image. I was obviously going to crop it to 1:1 to place the flower more centrally in the image, and also to crop out the distracting rock on the right hand side.
So my photo is this one here of a coat dramatically strewn across a rock. And I think that mine is a little bit more obvious when it comes to what's the subject of the photo. So mine is also shot a lot more square on, and you'll also notice that my photo remains in the 4:5 aspect ratio, where Jack's cropped his down to 1:1. Generally speaking, I don't like cropping to 1:1 because I feel that it just constrains the image a little bit too much, and I like having my photo a little bit of room to breathe around the edges. I think if I was to take the photo again, I would have moved the coat so it was a little bit more prevalent on the rocks. However, that would risk me being murdered by a scary demon child, and then Jack would have to have edited the episode, and I just don't think I could have dealt with you having to listen to that. When we compare the two images, I find that mine is actually a lot emptier, which is interesting because generally speaking, that's a little bit more kind of Jack's style. I prefer busier photos, where Jack prefers slightly emptier photos. I suppose that if you spend enough time producing content on the internet with somebody else, you eventually turn into that person. I also think that as far as the narrative is concerned, my photo's a lot more negative, which, again, kind of flips it on its head a little bit as well. My photo definitely fits in with the narrative of Wistman's Woods a little bit more. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, Wistman's Woods is regarded as one of the most haunted places on Dartmoor, so I feel like a lonely lost coat of a small child definitely adds a little bit of an element to that narrative. I think the only other interesting comparison to make is with the angle, that Jack shot his photo looking up at the flower, whereas I've shot mine square on. I suppose that just goes to show that Jack is scared of flowers, and I'm ready to face my inevitable fight with the scary demon child like a man.
I channeled my inner Ben in this second image. It was a photo of a tree, and it was the first photo I took once I was out of the woods. I think I saw this shot because of the juxtaposition between the busyness in the foreground and the emptiness in the back. I cropped the image again to 1:1 to focus on the tree, but if I was to reshoot this, I think I'd move back a bit. There was a lot more emptiness than I realised around the tree, and perhaps it would have added to the lonely feel of the image.
So my photo was taken when I kind of had a little bit of a plan for the day. Unfortunately, that plan fell through very quickly, as most of mine tend to. The plan was to create a little bit of a narrative with the journey of walking to Wistman's Woods, photographing throughout the woods, and then walking back again. And this was meant to be a bit of an establishing shot. We then decided halfway through our journey to Wistman's Woods that we were actually going to go and hit up another location, so my plan didn't really work all that well. I think that this photo, it was meant to be an establishing shot within the series, and it is a bit of a classic Ben shot. You've got the contrast between the man-made sty and the natural woods behind it, and generally speaking, it's fine. And I think that's the problem. The photo is just fine. I was intending this to be the second or third photo in the series, which, acts as that placeholder. You don't want the second or third photo in the series to be sort of too hot in a 10 photo series, because it kind of ruins the hype for the big climax of the photo book, as it were.
Again, we've both gone for detail within the landscape, and we've also gone for different formats, which changes the sort of atmosphere of the image. Like Ben says, I think his is more of an establishing shot with the woods in the distance, which I like. Mine has more of a specific focus on the tree. This establishing shot again leads to more of a narrative, although a very literal one.
So after that, we left Wistman's Woods and headed over to Belevere Forest, where we decided to set ourselves a little bit of a challenge. The first challenge that we set was called the Tripod Challenge, invented by me very much on the spot. And what the Tripod Challenge is pretty straightforward. The person whose turn it is to take a photo places the tripod on the floor, and then the tripod isn't allowed to move until the second person has then taken their photo. Needless to say, this gives a huge advantage to the first person, as they can really screw over the second person, just as Jack did. Because Jack is the lanky, 6 foot almost freak of nature that he is, he decided to take advantage of my short ass and put the tripod just too tall for me to look over the top of the camera.
For those who aren't familiar with the RB67, Ben here has taken the ground glass off and is using his shirt as a makeshift dark cloth.
I mean, to be fair, I hold nothing against you. If I were in your shoes, I would have done exactly the same thing.
Well, Ben, I heard big things come in small packages, but I didn't realise that meant egos as well.
So Jack's tripod placement did leave an awful lot to be desired. I did struggle to take this photo, but decided to zoom in and take a photograph of the textures and the tones on the wall as opposed to the landscape itself. And I think it turned out quite well. I think that the textures definitely do add to the kind of dystopian feel to this image.
This image was also difficult for me to take. Not only have I set myself high standards, I set myself a high tripod as well. I like the idea of the two trees squaring up to each other. The natural symmetry and the distance drew my eye as well. Personally, I don't like the foreground, but this was bound to happen as I couldn't see half the image I was taking.
So, to compare the two images, I think out of all of the photos that we took, these are definitely the most different, and I also think that they definitely sum up our individual styles the best. On the one hand, you've got my detailed, close, almost macro image with those fine textures and tones there. And then on the other hand, you've got Jack's broad, wide, almost Ansel Adams-esque landscape. But the problem comes when you're comparing these two images. I feel like it's comparing sex to watching videos of cats falling in bins. Both incredibly satisfying, but in their own unique ways. I think it's interesting how my photo has a lot more contrast in it, whereas Jack's is a little bit more hazy. Again, I don't think that this is any negative thing, and if we switched that editing style, the photos wouldn't have worked as well as they did. Overall, I think it definitely adds to the narrative and stylistic choice that we both are working with.
So finally, we move on to the last challenge. Take something we're uncomfortable with and see who does it best.
What, you mean confrontation?
No, Ben, portraiture.
I thought it was the same thing.
My portrait is a classic full-body documentary shot of Ben in his natural habitat, which is a path. Again, centralising the subject, focusing the viewer on him. I like the way the tree hangs over him. It leaves a shadow on the right-hand side of the image, almost acting like a half vignette.
And this is my photo of Jack. I decided to include his pride and joy in this photo, his go-kart. And I do like the closeness of it. I think that it definitely adds a lot of intimacy to it. And I do get this vibe that he is a little bit of a boy racer in it, which is absolutely hilarious.
It's not true. It's not true.
Yeah.
Nan and I go at the speed limit.
How many times have you been on that driver's awareness course?
Less than 2, but more than 0. We're obviously not portrait photographers, but I do believe that these photos sort of represent our photographic styles. The main difference is the distance, and I think this represents our photographic styles and the way we see images. I think due to the posture and stance of the subject, I think Ben's image is a lot more candid, although it is staged. The photo is also a lot lighter due to the surroundings, which is definitely ironic, considering I'm a lot darker than Ben is.
Closing thoughts. It is very interesting how this was exactly the same camera, exactly the same film, exactly the same gear, exactly the same day, but we still managed to get 2 completely different photos. It is interesting as well that even though we have spent literally the last 4 years photographing together, our styles and narratives have developed in very different ways. And this is the other thing, that I can honestly say that from a photographic perspective, both of these photos work well, but for their own unique ways. As I said before, comparing these is literally like comparing apples to oranges. It's very, very difficult to do so. Both sets of images definitely have their merits, and both sets of images definitely also have their flaws.
Personally, for me, it was nice to get out. Taking pictures in new locations isn't really in my forte, but it was an interesting exercise keeping the tripod static and trying to find something to shoot. I've never been one for forcing photos, but I think this exercise definitely pushed me as a creative.
So, what were your favourite photos from the series? Is there a sequence that you liked better than the other? Did you prefer mine or Jack's? Do let us know down in the comments below. Other than that, Jack, if they liked your work and wanted to see more by you, where can they find you?
That'd be at Jack Henderson Photo. And Ben, if they liked your images, where can they find you?
They can find me at Ben Ballman Photo. If you liked it, subscribe. If you really liked it, then like it. And as always, we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Portrait forever.